Girl whispers. 3 words to bus driver. Minutes later, FBI locks down the school. The bus rumbled through the quiet suburban streets, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. Inside, students chatted, laughed, and scrolled through their phones. Just another routine start to a school day. But for Emily Carter, this morning was anything but normal. She sat in the 3rd row, gripping the edge of her seat, her fingers trembling slightly. Her wide brown eyes flickered toward the bus driver, Mr. Thompson, a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor. She hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the other students, then leaned forward. With a shaky breath, she whispered 3 words. At first, Mr. Thompson didn't react. His hands remained firm on the steering wheel, his eyes focused on the road ahead. But then, something shifted. His face paled. His knuckles turned white. Without a word, he reached for his radio, his voice suddenly low and urgent. "This is Bus 47. We have a situation." The radio crackled in response, but Emily barely heard it. Her heart pounded as she sat back, eyes darting to the window. Everything felt different now. Every house they passed, every turn the bus took, something was happening, and she had set it in motion. Within minutes, the bus arrived at Westridge High, but instead of the usual chaotic scene of students pouring into the building, the atmosphere was tense. Several police cars were parked. Outside, their lights flashing, though their sirens remained off. Officers stood at the entrance, speaking hurriedly into their radios. As soon as the bus doors swung open, 2 men in dark suits stepped forward. "Emily Carter?" one of them asked, his voice calm but firm. Emily nodded, her throat dry. "Come, with us." The other students gawked, their whispers spreading like wildfire. What had she done? What was going on? Even Mr. Thompson, who had been a bus driver for over 20 years, looked shaken. As Emily was led away, the school went into immediate lockdown. Students were ushered into classrooms. Doors were locked. Blinds were pulled down. The principal's voice came over the intercom, trying to maintain order, but the panic was already setting in. Meanwhile, in a high-tech control center miles away, an FBI task force had just been alerted. Satellite images loaded onto screens, phone lines buzzed with activity, and agents scrambled to assess the situation. Whatever those 3 words were, they had set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Hours later, the scene shifted again, to a grand wood-paneled courtroom. The air was thick with tension as Emily sat in the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes, watched her carefully. Across the room, a team of prosecutors and defense attorneys whispered, among themselves, exchanging nervous glances. Then, as the lead prosecutor stepped forward, a hush fell over the room. He took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and asked the question that had been hanging in the air since that morning. "Miss Carter, can you repeat the 3 words you whispered to the bus driver?" Emily swallowed hard. She knew the weight of her next words. She knew they could change everything. She took a deep breath, looked around the silent courtroom, then finally spoke. The moment the words left her lips, the entire courtroom gasped. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that made your skin prickle, the kind that stretched on just long enough to make you hold your breath. Every pair of eyes was locked onto Emily, waiting, processing what they had just heard. Even the judge, who had maintained a firm and composed expression throughout the trial, shifted slightly in her seat. Emily's hands trembled in her lap. She could hear the faint clicking of a reporter's pen somewhere behind her, the rustle of someone shifting in their chair. But no one spoke. No one moved. Then, finally, the prosecutor cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice careful, measured. "Do you understand the weight of what you just revealed?" Emily nodded slowly. She knew. She had known from the moment she whispered those words to the bus driver that this would spiral into something far bigger than herself. But she had no choice. Across the room, at the defense table, a man sat stiffly, his jaw tight. He hadn't said much throughout the trial, but now, his fingers drummed lightly against the wooden table, the only sign of his unease. His name was Richard Lawson, a high-profile attorney known for taking on impossible cases. He was defending the one person no one thought could be defended. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we are dealing with here is not a simple misunderstanding, not a coincidence. This case, this moment, was set into motion the second Emily Carter got onto that bus." He took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the room. The 3 words she whispered changed everything. Emily looked down at her hands, her mind drifting back to that morning. She had almost not spoken at all. She had almost let the moment pass, convincing herself that she was imagining things, that she was being paranoid. But something deep in her gut had screamed at her to act. The day before, she had overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. It had been after school, in the quiet hallway near the back exit, where the janitor's closet and faculty offices were. She had stayed, late to help her teacher organize some paperwork. But as she walked past the office, she heard low voices inside. Something about the tone made her stop. She wasn't the type to eavesdrop, but the words had frozen her in place. "It has to happen tomorrow. No delays." A pause. Then another voice, quieter, firmer. "Are you sure the plan is in place?" Completely. Her heart had pounded in her chest. She couldn't see who was speaking, but she recognized one of the voices, a voice that belonged to someone who shouldn't have been talking about plans or sounding so serious. She had barely been able to move, scared that any slight sound would give her away. Then, something even more chilling. "If she figures it out, take care of it." Emily had backed away slowly, her breath caught in her throat. She had spent the rest of the night replaying the conversation in her head, trying to make sense of it. Who were they talking about? What was the plan? And worse, what did "take care of it" mean? She had barely slept. But by the time she stepped onto the bus the next morning, she had made her decision. She couldn't keep it to herself. So she whispered 3 words to the bus driver, 3 words that changed everything. And now, here she was, sitting in a courtroom, facing the aftermath. The judge finally spoke, her voice steady, but carrying an edge of curiosity. "Miss Carter, you are aware that your testimony has serious implications." "Yes, Your Honor," Emily said quietly. The prosecutor turned to the jury once more. "What we have here is more than just a school lockdown, more than just a simple warning. Emily Carter uncovered something dangerous, something that was never meant to be exposed." In the back of the courtroom, Emily's mother sat with her hands clasped tightly together, her face pale. She hadn't known everything. Emily had kept most of it to herself, trying to protect her. Richard Lawson, the defense attorney, finally leaned forward, speaking for the first time since the revelation. His voice was cool, professional, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Miss Carter," he said, tapping his pen against his notepad, "do you understand the consequences of making false accusations?" Emily lifted her gaze to meet his. "I didn't lie." Lawson studied her for a moment. Then he shifted his attention to the jury. "We live in a world where rumors spread faster than the truth," he said smoothly, "where fear clouds judgment. What my client stands accused of today is built on nothing more than a misunderstanding. The tension in the room deepened. Emily clenched her fists. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She knew what she heard. She knew the danger that was still out there. And now, with everything she had set in motion, there was no turning back. Emily could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, but she refused to back down. She had come too far, risked too much. She knew what she had heard that day near the faculty offices. She knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. The prosecutor took a step forward. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make one. Think clear for the courtroom. Who exactly did you hear speaking that day?" Emily hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because saying the name out loud made everything even more real. She glanced at the defense table, where Richard Lawson sat, his fingers intertwined, his expression unreadable, and then she looked past him to the man sitting beside him, Principal Derek Holloway. The moment the name left her lips, the entire courtroom rippled with murmurs. The man who had run West Ridge High for over a decade. The man who had given speeches about leadership and community. The man every student thought they could trust. Lawson leaned forward, his voice calm, but edged with something sharp. "You're telling this court that our respected school principal was involved in a criminal conspiracy." Emily didn't waver. "I'm saying I heard him planning something. And after what happened, I was right to be scared." The courtroom fell silent again. Then, the prosecutor spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we already have evidence that corroborates Miss Carter's claims. Audio recordings recovered from the school's security system confirm voices matching those of Principal Holloway and an unidentified accomplice. The conversation she described. It's real!" Gasps erupted across the room. Even the judge looked taken aback for a moment before regaining her composure. Principal Holloway's face remained eerily still, but his fingers twitched on the table. The prosecutor turned to the jury. Emily Carter's warning to the bus driver that morning, those 3 words, were enough to trigger an investigation before it was too late. Because of her actions, authorities were able to uncover an operation that had been happening right under the school's nose. A plan that, if carried out, could have harmed students. He paused. But it didn't. Because of her, at the defense table, Lawson whispered something to his client. Holloway didn't respond. He was staring at Emily now, his expression unreadable. Then, the prosecutor delivered the final blow. The FBI conducted a search of Principal Holloway's home and office. They found documents, emails, and financial records proving his involvement. He was orchestrating something dangerous, and Emily Carter stopped him before it was too late. The tension in the courtroom shattered as the judge called for order. Holloway's lawyer looked exhausted, like he had known this was coming, but had been grasping for some last hope. And then, just like that, it was over. The trial concluded with Holloway's conviction. The truth had been exposed. The man who had held power for so long, who had been trusted, was led away in handcuffs. Emily sat quietly in the courtroom as the verdict was read, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. She had done what she needed to do. She had spoken, up when it mattered, even when she was terrified no one would believe her. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, voices calling her name. But she didn't stop to talk. She just walked toward her mother, who was waiting with open arms. As they embraced, Emily let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for weeks. Sometimes she thought, all it took was 3 words to change everything.